He shouldn't have been alive. A torn and dust-covered German shepherd, ribs showing through his matted coat, stumbled across the rocky flats of Dustbrook just as dawn broke. His paws were bleeding, raw from the endless scrape of desert stone, but still, he kept moving. Step by dragging step. His body said he was done, but something deeper refused to stop. That's how they found him. 3 U.S. Marines on routine patrol, not halted by gunfire or ambush, but by a dog who limped out of the desert like a ghost that refused to die. His fur was singed, his eyes pleading. He didn't bark or whine. He simply looked at them, turned away, limped forward, and looked back again. And in that silence, something louder than words called them to follow. What they discovered would stay with them forever, a dying woman, a forgotten house, and a truth buried so deep it was never meant to be found. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe that sometimes, angels come on 4 legs instead of 2, hit that subscribe button and type Amen in the comments. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a rescue. It's a divine appointment. The sun climbed slow and hot over Dustbrook, New Mexico, bleaching the desert into blinding sheets of white. The air shimmered with heat, and the long shadows of mesquite brush swayed like dark ghosts against the sand. Above, the sky stretched dry and brittle, an empty, endless blue. It had been a week of relentless heat, the kind that made the air hum and the ground crack. Dustbrook, a border town long forgotten by most maps, baked under the weight of it. People here knew better than to draw attention. The kind of place where silence was a form of survival. Through that silence, a Humvee crawled along the gravel road, its tires grinding and spitting dust. Inside were 3 Marines, each shaped by duty, loss, and the kind of silence soldiers know too well. In the passenger seat sat Staff Sergeant Clay Morgan, 39, one boot propped on the dash, fingers tapping a quiet rhythm on the door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face carved by the sun, the faint gray of a trimmed beard tracing his jaw. A thin scar ran along the back of his neck, a mark few noticed, but one that told a story. Clay was the kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Calm, deliberate, steady, but behind that stillness was a wound that time hadn't quite closed. His last K-9 partner, Scout, had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan. Since then, Clay hadn't worked with another dog. Some ghosts don't leave, even when you do. Behind the wheel was Corporal Wyatt Ford, 30 and grinning like a man who refused to let the world harden him. He was wiry, sunburned, and always had his baseball cap pulled low. A ranch kid from Amarillo, he'd grown up surrounded by animals, dogs, horses, dust, and hard lessons. Animals don't lie, he liked to say. They just survive. In the back seat sat Lieutenant Jackson Reed, their commanding officer. 32, clean-cut, sharp-jawed, the type whose uniform always looked freshly pressed, even in desert dust. Jackson was strict, by the book and measured, the kind of man who believed in order because it kept chaos at bay. Clay respected that, even if it meant they clashed at times. The Humvee rumbled through the edge of town, scanning the wasteland along the old rail tracks, looking for nothing, expecting nothing. The radio was quiet. Then, out of nowhere, movement. From the right, a blur broke through the brush, kicking up a storm of dust. A dog, lean and gray-coated, blood-crusted in its fur, burst into view. Its ribs showed through skin stretched tight, its stride uneven but desperate. It limped across the road and skidded to a stop right in front of the Humvee. Whoa! Wyatt slammed the brakes. The dog stood there, panting hard, eyes locked on Clay through the windshield, wild, pleading, intelligent. Then it barked once. Sharp. Then again. What the hell, Jackson muttered. Clay was already unbuckling his belt. Something's wrong. He stepped into the heat, boots crunching gravel. The air shimmered. The dog didn't back away. It took one slow step toward him, then lifted a paw as if pointing. A torn collar hung around its neck, stained with old blood. Clay knelt. "You alone, boy?" The shepherd barked once more, turned, took a few limping steps into the brush, then looked back. Wyatt shaded his eyes. "He wants us to follow. I've seen that look before, my collie used to do the same thing with goats." Jackson sighed, already checking his GPS. "We're not here to chase strays. There's a patrol grid." "We follow," Clay interrupted, quiet but firm. Jackson hesitated, then nodded. 10 minutes. Then we call it." They grabbed their sidearms and stepped into the brush. The dog, who they would later call Ghost, led the way. He moved fast for a wounded animal, weaving through thorn bushes and brittle scrub. The Marines followed close, boots cracking dry clay, the desert buzzing with flies and heat. A rabbit darted past, but Ghost didn't flinch. He had a mission. They crested a low ridge. Below, a faint trail wound through the dust, speckled with dark stains. Clay knelt, pressed a finger to one. "Not animal," he said. "Human." Ghost whined, looked back, then pushed forward. The brush thickened, then opened. Ahead stood a house, or what was left of one. Slumped and weathered, with faded blue paint peeling from its wood, and a rusted tin roof that shimmered like copper in the heat. One window was shattered, and the front door hung crooked. Ghost limped faster now, barking with sudden urgency. He jumped onto the porch, pressed his body against the door, whining, then turned to the Marines, eyes wide. "Someone's inside," Clay said. Wyatt's hand went to his weapon. "Stay sharp." Clay stepped forward and peered through the grimy window. Then froze. A woman lay on the couch, frail, pale, unmoving. Her chest rose and fell in faint, uneven gasps. A spill of auburn hair clung to her forehead. A tipped pill bottle lay on the floor beside her. "Get the med kit," Clay ordered. Ghost scratched frantically at the door, whining, almost crying. That moment, that decision to follow a wounded dog into a house no one had checked for years, would change all of their lives forever. Clay took one step back, then kicked the door. The frame splintered and swung open with a crack. The air inside was thick, heavy with dust and neglect. Ghost darted in, beelining for the woman, pressing against her legs with a trembling whine. She didn't stir. Her skin was pale, her body weak. The room was too quiet, no fan, no hum of life. Just dust motes and the faint sound of her broken breathing. "She's alive," Clay said, kneeling beside her. "Barely." Wyatt scanned the room. "Place is spotless. Too clean." In the kitchen, a plate sat untouched beside a dog bowl. The food had long dried, pancakes curled and stiff. "She was about to eat," Wyatt muttered. "Didn't know she was gonna collapse." Jackson's voice came from the doorway. "Signal's bad, I'll get to higher ground, call for evac." Clay nodded, unscrewed his canteen, and carefully lifted the woman's head. "Help me prop her up," he told Wyatt. They eased her upright, poured water past her cracked lips. She swallowed, barely. "She's not gone yet," Clay whispered. Ghost stayed pressed to her side, eyes locked on her face, as if willing her to breathe. The woman's breath came in shallow waves, each one weaker than the last. Her skin was fever-hot, her lips cracked. Clay could feel her pulse, faint, fluttering, but there. "Dehydration," he muttered. "And maybe more." Ghost pressed closer, his body trembling. His paw rested on her leg as if to keep her tethered to life. From outside, Jackson's voice echoed through the open door. "Got a line. Evac's 23 minutes out. They're routing a mobile team from Roswell Regional." Clay nodded and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Good. Tell them she's critical." Inside, the house felt like a snapshot of another time, a moment frozen mid-breath. The walls were faded, the air thick with heat and silence. On a side table, a photo album sat under a film of dust. Beside it, an empty glass and a forgotten book. Wyatt knelt near the kitchen, eyes scanning. "You ever notice how the air feels heavier in places like this?" he said softly. "Like something's been waiting here too long." He opened the fridge, unplugged. Nothing but an empty jar and the smell of old air. The cabinets held only a few cans of soup and rice. It wasn't neglect. It was survival. "She was trying," Wyatt murmured. "This place is too clean for someone who gave up." Clay glanced down at the woman again. "No. She didn't give up. She just ran out of time." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of the sirens, faint, distant, growing closer. When the ambulance finally appeared over the ridge, the red lights flickered through the dusty air like salvation cutting through ruin. 2 paramedics rushed in. One was tall and weathered, salt and pepper hair slicked back, eyes sharp from decades on the job, Jeff Daniels, the kind of medic who could read a scene in one glance. The other was Lainey Quinn, mid-20s, auburn hair tied tight, her movements fast but gentle. Clay met them at the door. Female, mid-30s. Severe dehydration, possible autoimmune crisis. Consciousness fluctuating. "Let's move." Jeff's tone left no room for hesitation. As they entered, Ghost rose and stiffened. His hackles lifted, but his growl was low, not aggression, just protection. Lainey crouched, her voice soft. "Hey, it's okay, boy. We're here for her." Ghost froze, eyes flicking from her to Rachel. Then, as if understanding, he stepped aside, keeping just close enough to watch. They worked quickly, stabilizing, checking vitals, securing her for. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, Ghost followed step for step. "Can't take him inside the ambulance," Jeff said as he loaded Rachel in. "Protocol. She panics when he's not near," Lainey countered, watching the dog's desperate stare. "Let him follow in the Humvee. Keep the door open so she can see him through the window." Clay nodded. "Done." The convoy rolled out, ambulance leading, Humvee trailing. The desert passed in endless streaks of dust and light. Inside the Humvee, the air was heavy with engine heat and unspoken thoughts. Ghost sat in the passenger seat beside Clay, his nose pressed to the window, watching the ambulance ahead like it was carrying his whole world. Wyatt glanced over from the wheel. "You ever lose a K9 before?" Clay's jaw tightened. "Yeah." He leaned back, eyes on the road. "Scout. Belgian Malinois. Smartest dog I ever worked with." He caught a scent seconds before an IED went off. "Bought me just enough time to dive for cover." Wyatt's voice softened. "He didn't make it." Clay shook his head. "No. Been a long time since I worked with another dog." Ghost shifted, resting his head on Clay's knee. For a moment, Clay didn't move. Then his hand came down, slow, steady, to rest on Ghost's head. "He reminds me of him," Clay said quietly. "Same eyes. Same quiet way of seeing everything." Wyatt smiled faintly. "Then maybe Scout sent him." Clay didn't answer, but he didn't disagree either. The Roswell Regional Clinic appeared out of the horizon, a squat white building gleaming under the noon sun, its solar panels reflecting harsh light into the desert air. The ambulance rolled to a stop. Paramedics jumped out, rushing Rachel through the sliding glass doors. Ghost whined in the back seat, pacing in circles. Clay opened the door. "Go." The shepherd bolted, running straight after the stretcher. Nurses at the front desk turned at the sight, a bleeding, panting German shepherd shadowing a gurney. "No animals inside," a nurse called, but Lainey stepped in quickly. "He stays with her. She'll crash without him." The nurse frowned, then sighed. "Fine. 30 minutes, tops." They wheeled Rachel into a curtained room. Ghost followed, lying down at the base of her bed. His tail curled in, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with hers. Rachel stirred, eyes half open. "I can't pay for this," she whispered, voice weak as paper. "That doesn't matter right now," Clay said softly. She blinked, eyes glassy. "They'll take him if I can't prove he's mine. I lost the papers. I don't have anything." "You have us," Clay said. "That's enough." Her throat tightened. "He's all I have left." Ghost lifted his head at the sound of her voice, his amber eyes focused entirely on her. Rachel's gaze drifted upward, filled with tears. "After Daniel died, after the funeral, the calls stopped. The bills didn't. I sold everything just to keep the house. Ghost stayed. He never left." Her voice broke. "He's the only reason I'm still here." Clay's expression hardened, not from anger, but from understanding. He had seen soldiers lost on the battlefield. He knew the look of someone who'd been fighting alone for too long. That night, while Rachel slept, Clay stepped into the dim hallway. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wyatt leaned against the wall, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Clay exhaled slowly. "I'm making calls." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "To who?" Clay's eyes stayed fixed on the window. "People who still give a damn." The morning sun rose over Roswell, filtering through the blinds in thin lines of gold. Inside room 204, Rachel Carter lay resting, her breathing steadier, her color returning, but her body still frail. On the floor beside her, Ghost slept curled up like a sentry on break. His paws twitched in dreams, but his ears never stopped listening. At 8 a.m., a nurse entered, Emma Singh, small, efficient, with warm brown skin and kind almond eyes. Her voice was calm, gentle, and almost melodic. "Miss Carter," she said, adjusting the foredrip. "Vitals are looking better today." Rachel stirred, voice rasping. "Is he allowed to stay?" Emma smiled softly. "For now. And between you and me, he's better company than most patients we get around here." Rachel smiled faintly, tears catching at the corners of her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Down the hall, Clay stood by a window with a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was quiet but strained. "With respect, ma'am," he said, "this isn't a handout. She's a veteran's widow, chronically ill, uninsured, and barely hanging on. There has to be an emergency program, something." The voice on the other end crackled through static. "We need formal documentation, death certificate, proof of income, lease records, insurance ID, medical files. Without them, we can't process aid." Clay's jaw flexed. What if those documents were lost during a move? Then she can apply again, but it'll take several weeks. He hung up, staring out the window as the desert shimmered in the distance. Wyatt approached, holding 2 coffees. "No luck?" Clay shook his head. "Insurance still has her listed under an old address. They think she dropped coverage. As far as the system's concerned, she doesn't exist." Wyatt sighed. "So she's invisible." Clay nodded. "Not for long." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, battered notebook, the kind soldiers carried long after they stopped needing to. Flipping through, he stopped at a name and hit dial. After 2 rings, a woman answered. "Helen Morgan speaking." Clay's voice softened. "Hey, Mom. Helen Morgan speaking." Clay exhaled, relief threading through the tension in his chest. "Hey, Mom." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of rustling papers and distant wind chimes. "You only call me this early when something's wrong," Helen said, her voice brisk, familiar, a nurse's voice that carried both command and care. "Talk." Clay rubbed a hand across his face. "I've got a patient. Civilian. Female, mid-30s. Husband was Army, killed in a convoy accident 3 years back. She's been living out near Dustbrook. No insurance, no records, no family left. She's sick, autoimmune, untreated. I need a miracle or a loophole. Helen didn't even hesitate. What's her name? Rachel Carter. Helen's voice softened just slightly. All right. I'll drive in tonight. I still know a few people in Roswell's medical records. I've got blank assistance forms in my cabinet, the ones they pretend don't exist. Don't ask how I got them. Clay almost smiled. I wasn't gonna. Good. Make sure she gets fluids, and for heaven's sake, tell someone to feed that dog. He sounds like he's earned it. Yes, ma'am. See you in a few hours. And Clay. Yeah. I'm proud of you. You always did find the ones the world forgot. The line went dead, but something eased in his chest for the first time all day. By late afternoon, the clinic had quieted. Rachel was awake now, sitting up against a pillow, color beginning to return to her face. Her eyes were still sunken, but alert. Ghost lay at her feet, his head resting across her ankle, refusing to move even when nurses came and went. Clay entered quietly, carrying a tray with a bottle of water, a protein bar, and a slice of apple. Trying to sneak hospital food past the staff. Rachel asked weakly, her voice thin but amused. Clay cracked a small grin. You caught me. You need the calories. She nodded, breaking a piece of the apple in half and offering it to Ghost, who accepted it with slow, deliberate care. You said you were a Marine? She asked after a moment. Still am, Clay replied. On domestic patrol rotation. Her eyes drifted toward the small framed photo on the table beside her, the one the nurses had found in her bag. A younger version of herself stood beside a tall man in fatigues, smiling with a puppy in her arms. That's Daniel, she said softly. My husband. He was with the 4th Infantry Division. Died in a convoy fire. Clay looked at the photo, then back at her. You stayed here after. I tried to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But after he was gone, the house, it felt empty. Bills piled up, insurance lapsed, and when I got sick, it all fell apart. I lost my job. Then the car. Then the heat. But Ghost stayed. She brushed her fingers along Ghost's ear. He found me after a storm. Just showed up at my door like he knew I needed saving. Clay's jaw flexed. He probably did. When night came, the clinic lights dimmed to a sterile glow. Ghost didn't sleep much. Every time someone passed the room, his ears twitched, his eyes tracking each shadow. By midnight, headlights flashed across the parking lot. A pale sedan rolled in, and from it stepped Helen Morgan, 62 years old, iron-gray hair pulled back, her face lined with both age and authority. She wore tan slacks, a pressed linen blouse, and shoes that looked made for standing 12 hours straight. In one hand, she carried a thick folder labeled emergency docs and contacts. Clay met her at the entrance. You look like hell, she said immediately, then softened. But I'll allow it. Who's our patient? Room 204. Rachel Carter. Helen nodded and headed in without waiting for more. Rachel looked up when the older woman entered. Helen's presence filled the small space like sunlight cutting through cold air. I'm Helen, she said simply, pulling up a chair. You've had a rough go. Rachel blinked, uncertain. You're Clay's mother, Helen finished for her. But tonight, I'm the cavalry. Rachel's lips twitched in a faint smile. You sound like a nurse. 40 years in trauma wards, Helen replied, reaching into her folder. You can't scare me with a little dehydration. She examined the 4-line, adjusted the flow with a quick flick, and checked Rachel's vitals. Good. You're stable. That's a start. Clay leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the two women. For the first time since the desert, the room didn't feel heavy. Helen sat back. Now, let's talk about fixing what the system broke. I've already got a friend at the Roswell Assistance Office, owes me 7 favors. We'll get you expedited forms for disability and medical aid. But we'll need to establish your dependency on Ghost, too. Rachel's eyes widened. They're talking about taking him, aren't they? Clay nodded slowly. Not if we make him official. Helen smiled, that old nurse's grin that meant trust me. Don't worry, sweetheart. Bureaucracy may be heartless, but it still bleeds ink. We'll write faster than they can read. Rachel laughed, small, cracked, but real. For the first time, hope flickered through her voice. By morning, the paperwork had begun. Helen had already filled half a stack, her handwriting quick, precise, and fearless. She called in 2 favors before breakfast and had a case number by noon. While she worked, Maria Santos arrived. She was in her 40s, shoulders squared, her hair streaked with silver that glimmered under the clinic lights. She'd once been a combat medic in Afghanistan, now a case manager for disabled veterans. She entered the room with the quiet confidence of someone used to bending rules for the right reasons. So this is the famous Ghost, she said, crouching beside the dog. He sniffed her hand and leaned his head into it without hesitation. Maria smiled. Good boy. Then to Rachel, I hear you need an ESA certification. Rachel frowned. I've never seen a therapist. I wouldn't even know where to start. Maria nodded. You don't need a therapist to tell you what saved your life. You just need one willing to write it down. Helen chuckled softly from behind her paperwork. She's not wrong. Maria spread out several forms on the table. We'll get Ghost certified as your emotional support animal. We'll need a doctor's note, a signature from a medical professional, and a case sponsor. Lucky for you, you've got both right here. She nodded toward Helen and Clay. Clay signed first, his signature sharp and deliberate. She's not a number, he said. She's family now. Helen followed with a steady hand. Maria checked each field, nodded, then circled the next section. We'll need a vet's confirmation of Ghost's health and chip scan. No records, no registration. I'll take him, came a voice from the doorway. They turned. Lieutenant Jackson Reed stood there, posture crisp, expression unreadable. You sure? Clay asked. Jackson gave a brief nod. It's on my way to base. I'll handle it. That afternoon, Jackson drove Ghost to the Desert Ridge Animal Clinic, a 1-story building tucked behind a diner painted a cheerful shade of mint green. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and shampooed fur. The receptionist looked up. Name? Ghost, Jackson said. Owner? His humans back at Roswell Regional, Jackson replied evenly. We're getting him cleared for ESA certification. A few minutes later, Dr. Leo Chen appeared, mid-30s, tired eyes, kind hands. He examined Ghost with care, tracing the scars along his foreleg and ribs. This dog's been through hell, Dr. Chen murmured. Wire tether scars, deep bruising. Malnutrition lines too, he's been starving before. Any chip? Jackson asked. The vet shook his head. None. That'll help the case, Jackson said quietly. When they were done, Dr. Chen handed him a thick envelope, clean bill of health, photographs, and a blank registration form. Jackson gave a curt nod. Thanks, document. As he left, Ghost glanced back at the vet once, tail wagging faintly, a soldier's thank you. Back at the clinic, the fundraiser that Jackson had quietly posted earlier began to take off. It had started small, a few messages sent to veterans forums, shared across bases and social media pages. By evening, the total had climbed past $2,000. Comments poured in from Marines, families, and strangers. Tell her Ghost did his job better than most men ever will. Prayers for Rachel and her guardian angel. Semper Fi, Ghost. When Rachel saw the page, she covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. You believe me, she whispered. You really believe me. Helen handed her a tissue, smiling gently. We never stopped. Rachel reached down and ran her fingers through Ghost's fur. He found me when no one else did, she said softly. I thought I was saving him, but really, he was saving me. Ghost pressed closer, eyes calm, as if agreeing with every word. The soft murmur of the clinic was broken only by the faint hum of machines and the steady rhythm of Rachel's breathing. For the first time in years, peace had settled into her bones. But peace, as Clay knew too well, never stayed long. Morning sunlight spilled across the polished floors of Roswell Regional. Clay sat in the waiting area with a half-empty cup of coffee, while Helen reviewed stacks of forms beside him, methodical, relentless, the tip of her pen moving like a scalpel. The fundraiser had crossed $3,000 overnight, and Maria Santos had texted earlier to confirm, ESA paperwork approved. Certification ready within 48 hours. Finally, things were aligning. Finally, there was light ahead. Then the front door opened. A man stepped inside, tall, lean, too polished for the desert. He wore clean jeans, a bomber jacket, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His beard was trimmed, his skin sun-worn, and his blue eyes darted around the lobby with the restlessness of someone who never stayed still. He walked to the desk, hands casually tucked in his jacket pockets. I'm here to see Rachel Carter. Marcy, the curly-haired nurse at reception, looked up. And you are? He smiled wider. Her husband. Derek Carter. The coffee slipped slightly in Clay's hand. Derek. The name Rachel had whispered once, a shadow she'd never fully spoken about. He stood slowly, his bootsteps echoing against the tile. The air in the lobby changed, the way it does when a storm walks through a door disguised as a man. Marcy picked up the phone to call security, but Clay reached her first. It's fine, he said quietly. I've got it. Derek turned, meeting his eyes. You must be the Marine who's been helping my wife. Appreciate it, man. But I'll take things from here. She's not your wife anymore, Clay said evenly. Derek smirked. We never finalized the paperwork. Life got messy. Deployments, distance. But that's my wife and my dog, and I'm here to make things right. You abandoned her, Clay said flatly. Derek's jaw flexed. That's one version. He leaned in slightly. Thing is, I trained that shepherd before she took him. Ghost was mine. She didn't have the right. Clay's tone turned to steel. You mean after she filed a domestic violence report in Albuquerque? The color drained slightly from Derek's face, though his smirk stayed. No charges stuck, right? Guess that makes us even. Before Clay could answer, a low growl rolled through the air. Down the hall, Ghost had appeared, tail low, shoulders squared, every muscle tense. He moved slowly, eyes fixed on Derek. The sound coming from his chest wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the walls, a deep, primal warning. Hey, Derek said, trying for casual. Hey, boy. It's me. Remember? Ghost's lips curled, teeth bared. He stepped forward once, then again. Back, Clay commanded, snapping his fingers sharply. Ghost stopped, but his eyes didn't waver. He didn't blink. He didn't look away. Derek took a step back. This is ridiculous. He knows me. No, Clay said. He remembers you. Clay turned to Marcy. Get Maria Santos. Now. Maria arrived within minutes, her expression already set in controlled focus. She found Derek seated in the hallway, pretending relaxation, one ankle over his knee, a rehearsed smile plastered across his face. So, Maria began, folding her arms. You're here to make a claim on Ghost. Derek nodded smoothly. Yeah. I raised him before things fell apart. He's trained. He knows my voice. Maria opened a thin folder and pulled out several documents. We have veterinary reports from the day he was found, wire tether scars, severe malnutrition, dehydration. Those wounds are consistent with neglect, not training. I didn't abandon him, Derek snapped. Rachel took him when she left. Maria flipped to a photo, Ghost curled up in Rachel's truck, ribs showing, his eyes still bright but hollow. She found him near Route 87, same week shelter records list a stray shepherd abandoned in that area. The same stretch where she camped after leaving you. She stole him. She rescued him, Maria said firmly. There's a difference. Derek leaned back, jaw tightening, but said nothing. Clay appeared in the doorway. Rachel's writing a statement, he said. She'll be ready soon. Inside her room, Rachel sat at the edge of the bed, her hand trembling as she held the pen. Ghost lay beside her, calm but alert, his head resting against her knee. He's here, Clay said quietly. Rachel froze, eyes going distant. Derek? Clay nodded. He wants Ghost. Says the dog was his. Her voice cracked. He never even touched that dog. He used to scream when Ghost got near the porch. He called him worthless. Clay stepped closer. Then tell them that. In your own words. She stared at the blank page, then began to write. Her handwriting shook, but every letter was steady with truth. That afternoon, the air inside the Department of Public Welfare was cool and sterile. They gathered in a small office, Maria, Clay, Rachel, and Derek sitting across from one another at a metal table. At the head sat Susan Brewer, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the calm patience of someone who'd seen too many families tear each other apart. This hearing is to determine rightful ownership and guardianship of one German Shepherd, known as Ghost, she began. Both parties claim prior connection. Derek spoke first, smooth, practiced. I trained Ghost. Bought him before deployment. Rachel left with him when she moved. I just want what's mine. Rachel's hands clenched in her lap. When it was her turn, her voice trembled but didn't falter. I didn't take Ghost, she said softly. I found him. After Derek left, I was living out of my truck. A week later, during a sandstorm, I heard scratching at my tailgate. He was skin and bones. I fed him. He stayed. He never left. She slid the vet report across the table, proof of the starvation lines, the infections, the recovery. If I hadn't taken him, he'd be dead. Susan read silently, flipping through each page. These ESA forms include testimony from 2 active-duty Marines, a clinic nurse, and a retired medical professional. All confirm ongoing psychological reliance. Derek scoffed. They're just her friends. Clay reached into his folder and placed a single sheet on the table, signed and notarized. This, he said, is a sworn declaration from James Callahan, retired battalion commander. He certifies that Ghost performed a life-saving act during a documented medical emergency. In his words, that dog did what a soldier would. The room fell silent. Then Ghost, who had been lying quietly by Rachel's chair, rose. He walked forward, slow and deliberate. He looked at Derek, held the stare for a long, unblinking moment. Then he turned to Rachel, placed one paw on her leg, and rested his head in her lap. The gesture said everything no paper could. Susan Brewer closed the file. I'm granting custody to Rachel Carter. Ghost will be registered as her emotional support companion, effective immediately. Case closed. Derek stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. His mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. He turned and walked out, his boots echoing down the hall until the sound disappeared entirely. Ghost didn't watch him leave. He simply sat beside Rachel, head high, calm and unshaken, a soldier standing guard over the person he chose. That night, the desert wind picked up again. The clinic windows rattled softly, the kind of sound that seeps into dreams. Rachel slept with Ghost curled close, her hand resting on his neck. Outside, Clay watched the sky shift from violet to black, the stars cutting through the wind's haze. Some storms, he murmured, don't end with thunder. They end with silence. Wyatt stood beside him, arms crossed. You think that's the last we've seen of him? Clay didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Ghost stirred inside, one ear twitching. Even asleep, he knew, peace was never guaranteed. By the time dusk settled over Roswell, the air had begun to change. The sky, once gold and endless, turned the color of rust. Clouds rolled low and fast, carrying the smell of dust and rain that rarely ever came. Inside room 204, Rachel slept lightly, her body still weak but healing. Ghost lay at her feet, his chest rising and falling in slow rhythm, one ear always tilted toward the door. Even in rest, he stood guard. Clay had moved his cot into the hallway just outside her room, claiming it was for convenience, but everyone knew better. He trusted the world less when it grew quiet. By midnight, the storm hit. Wind screamed through the desert, rattling the clinic windows like 1,000 hands. Dust slammed against the glass, turning the air outside into swirling brown chaos. The building groaned under the weight of it, every vent whistling, every door trembling in its frame. Rachel stirred awake, heart pounding. She sat up, disoriented by the sound. Ghost? He was already on his feet, body stiff, tail low, hackles raised. A low growl rippled through his throat, not fear, not confusion, but recognition. Something was wrong. Down the corridor, a door creaked open, the maintenance entrance, far below where anyone should be. The power flickered, lights dimming to half strength, buzzing like angry hornets. Footsteps echoed, soft, deliberate, measured. Ghost turned toward the sound. His growl deepened. Rachel felt her blood run cold. She pressed the call button on the wall, once, twice, but the line stayed dead. The storm had cut power to the emergency system. Ghost, she whispered. The doorknob turned. The door opened just enough to let the dark shape of a man slip through, black hoodie, torn jeans, boots covered in red soil. His face half hidden behind a mask, but his eyes, that same sharp blue, glinted in the dim light. Derek Carter. You always said I didn't fight for you, he hissed, stepping inside. The storm howled behind him, rain now hammering the windows. Well, here I am. Ghost didn't wait. He lunged. The sound that followed was chaos, the crash of metal, the thud of bodies against tile. The flashlight Derek carried spun across the floor, rolling until its beam sliced the dark in trembling circles. Derek shouted, swinging wildly. Something glinted, a crowbar. He swung it hard, catching Ghost across the ribs. The shepherd yelped but didn't back off. Rachel screamed. No. Ghost came again, faster, fueled by something ancient and instinctive. He clamped onto Derek's forearm, teeth sinking deep, dragging him backward toward the hall. The man shouted in pain, stumbling. The crowbar clanged against the wall and fell. The door burst open, Clay and Jackson charging in, boots pounding, weapons drawn but safety locks still on. Hands where I can see them. Clay roared. Derek tried to twist free, but Ghost had him pinned, growling low and steady, teeth locked like iron. Jackson moved in first, grabbing Derek by the shoulder and slamming him face down against the tile. You're done, he barked. Derek's voice was a ragged snarl. He bit me, that thing bit me. He saved her, Clay shot back, eyes blazing. Something you never did. Ghost released his grip only when Clay gave the order. The shepherd staggered backward, breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut along his foreleg. He limped to Rachel's side and pressed close, tail twitching once, then still. Rachel fell to her knees, clutching his fur. "You're okay, you're okay." The hallway flooded with nurses, lights flickering overhead. The storm outside raged louder, a wall of sound and fury beating against glass and steel. Jackson hauled Derek up, cuffing him with precise, brutal efficiency. "Breaking and entering during a declared storm emergency. That's felony level stupid." Derek spat blood onto the floor. "You think this changes anything?" Clay stepped forward until they were inches apart. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It changes everything." Down in the ER, Dr. Lin, the night surgeon, moved with calm precision as she stitched Ghost's leg. "No tendon damage," she murmured, her gloved hands steady. "He's lucky. So are you." Rachel sat nearby, her eyes red and wide, clutching Ghost's paw like it was an anchor. He looked up at her, eyelids drooping, exhausted but unbroken. "You saved me," she whispered. Again. Clay stood by the door, arms folded, watching the two of them, a woman reborn and a dog made of courage. He'd seen soldiers break under less, yet here was this battered shepherd, bleeding and calm, refusing to stop guarding the only person who ever believed in him. Within the hour, Deputy Langdon from the Roswell Sheriff's Office arrived, tall, broad, with salt and pepper hair and a voice rough as gravel. He took one look at the scene, then nodded toward the holding room where Derek sat, bandaged and seething. "Breaking into a clinic during lockdown, with intent to harm. That's prison time," Langdon said simply. "He won't be coming back, ma'am." Rachel's voice was small but steady. "Promise?" Langdon nodded once. "Promise." Maria Santos arrived soon after, still in her denim dress and boots, her face tight with fury. "He crossed a line tonight," she said. "I'll make sure every charge sticks." Helen was right behind her, holding a fresh blanket. She draped it around Rachel's shoulders like a mother would, then bent to check Ghost's stitches herself. "You, young man," she murmured, "deserve steak for the rest of your days." Ghost blinked slowly, tail tapping once against the floor. By morning, the storm had broken. The desert lay quiet, washed clean, puddles of red clay reflecting the soft gold of dawn. Inside the clinic, peace settled like a sigh. The Roswell Register published a short article that same day. German Shepherd foils intruder at clinic, hero dog protects patient. A photograph accompanied it, Ghost lying beside Rachel's bed, a neat white bandage around his foreleg, his eyes calm and alert. The story spread fast, first through the county, then across veteran forums, and finally, national news. A military blog shared it under the headline. "Dog saves owner, Marines save dog." Helen teared up reading it aloud. Wyatt high-fived Jackson in the hallway. Even Maria cracked a rare grin. "Guess Ghost just made the local legends list," she said. Rachel laughed through tears. "He already was one." That afternoon, a courier arrived with a thick envelope from the Department of Health and Human Services. Inside were two documents. The first, official ESA certification for Ghost Carter. The second, notice of waived hospital fees under emergency aid and public funding donation. Rachel's hands trembled as she held them. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Ghost, bandaged but proud, sat beside her. His eyes followed her face, patient, loving, waiting. "You didn't have to keep saving me," she whispered. But Ghost only leaned into her, pressing his head against her arm, and in that quiet gesture, she understood. It was never about duty. It was love, the kind that doesn't fade, doesn't ask, doesn't quit. The desert after a storm always felt like a prayer answered. Still air. Soft light. The dust finally resting where it belonged. Morning came gently to Dustbrook, New Mexico, the first calm dawn in weeks. The wind no longer screamed across the sand, instead, it whispered. The land itself seemed to breathe again. Outside the old Carter house, sunlight washed over the cracked porch and peeling green shutters. The structure still wore its scars, but for the first time, it didn't look like ruin. It looked like a beginning. A transport van rolled slowly up the dirt road, its tires crunching softly over the dried earth. When it stopped, Rachel Carter stepped out. She wore a pale yellow cardigan and jeans a size too loose, her hair freshly trimmed to shoulder length. The illness had left her thinner, but her eyes, those once dull, sunken eyes, shone with quiet determination. Beside her leapt down Ghost, his gait steady despite the faint scar across his foreleg. He sniffed the air, tail sweeping the dust like a flag of victory. Home. Rachel froze on the path, the weight of the moment pressing in. The desert wind tugged gently at her hair. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. Clay stepped into view from the side yard, wiping sweat from his brow. His gray shirt was damp, his hands coated in sawdust. Behind him, the faint sound of hammering echoed. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to walk through the door." Rachel blinked back tears. The yard was alive with movement, Wyatt hauling lumber toward the shed, Jackson installing a new windowpane with a cigarette hanging loose from his lips, and Helen, in overalls and a sun hat, painting the front porch a crisp shade of white. It wasn't just a repair job. It was a resurrection. "You didn't have to do all this," Rachel said softly, her voice trembling. Clay smiled faintly, brushing his hands against his pants. "You gave Ghost a second chance. We figured it was time someone gave you one." Rachel laughed through the tears, a sound that felt like life returning. Inside, the house had transformed. Gone were the rot and shadows. Fresh beige paint warmed the walls, sunlight streaming through new glass panes. The old furniture had been cleared out, replaced with donated pieces that still smelled faintly of varnish and hope. A new table, built by Wyatt from salvaged barnwood, stood proudly in the corner. A small bookshelf lined the wall, filled with donated novels, photo frames, and a single cross that Helen had placed gently above the mantel. The fireplace had been cleaned and stacked with wood, ready for its first spark in years. And by the window, in Ghost's corner, sat a padded mat embroidered with his name. Beside it, a ceramic food bowl, freshly painted in bold blue letters, Ghost. A basket of toys sat nearby, bones, ropes, and one oddly shaped stuffed squirrel that made Wyatt grin every time he saw it. Rachel stepped inside slowly, touching the walls, the air, the light, as if afraid it might vanish if she blinked. "It doesn't feel haunted anymore," she whispered. Helen, from behind her, smiled softly. "Because it's not. Ghost chased those things out, one growl at a time." Ghost wagged his tail, as if to confirm. They worked together all day. Clay repaired the porch railing while Wyatt rebuilt the back shed, turning it into a proper doghouse, though it looked more like a small cabin. Jackson replaced the roof shingles, humming a low blues tune as he worked, and Helen cooked inside, filling the air with the smell of cornbread and soap. In the afternoon, Maria Santos arrived, parking her dusty blue truck by the fence. She carried a small ficus tree in a pot. "For the living room," she said. "Something that doesn't give up easily." Rachel smiled, tears threatening again. "That's perfect." Even Deputy Langdon stopped by, his badge glinting in the sun, holding a box of old DVDs and paperbacks. "From the station," he said, setting it down with a grunt. "Seems the department's officially adopted Ghost as our honorary deputy." Rachel laughed, her first real laugh in months. "He's going to start asking for a salary soon." Langdon tipped his hat. "He's already earned it." By evening, the house smelled of lemon cleaner, new wood, and Helen's baking. The group gathered around the makeshift table, Clay, Wyatt, Jackson, Helen, Maria, and Rachel. Ghost lay under the table, occasionally nudging someone's leg as if taking attendance. Rachel looked around at them, these people she hadn't known weeks ago, who had somehow become her family. "I used to think family was something you were born with," she said quietly. But it turns out, it's who picks you up when you've hit the bottom. Who stays. Helen reached over, squeezing her hand gently. That's the only kind worth having. The others nodded, silent, the kind of silence that carries gratitude instead of emptiness. Clay didn't speak right away. His eyes had drifted to the wall where a framed sketch now hung. It had been drawn by a teenage patient from Roswell Clinic, a girl named Lily who'd lost her mother and found hope again through Ghost story. The drawing showed Rachel sitting on the porch, Ghost lying at her feet. Behind them stood the silhouettes of Clay, Wyatt, and Jackson against the vast New Mexico desert. Above them, in Rachel's handwriting, were the words. Family isn't who you're born with, it's who finds you when you've fallen. Clay swallowed hard. You know, he said softly, for a long time, I thought helping people was just a duty. Something we did because it was our job. He looked at Rachel. But this wasn't about duty. I wasn't rescuing you or Ghost. I think you two were rescuing me. Helen smiled, eyes full of quiet understanding. Sometimes the battlefield follows you home, son. But healing does, too, if you let it. That night, the stars gathered like witnesses in the clear desert sky. No wind, no sand, no noise, just peace. Ghost sat at the front door, watching the horizon. His ears twitched, eyes scanning the open land that stretched endlessly before them. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stayed where he belonged, watching, waiting, home. And in that silence, something sacred settled into place. Sometimes, miracles don't roar or thunder. They arrive quietly, on 4 tired legs, with a heart bigger than any wound. Ghost hadn't just saved Rachel. He had reminded them all that love doesn't need words, it just needs someone willing to stay. Weeks passed. The sun grew warmer, and the desert began to bloom, small bursts of yellow and purple wildflowers pushing up through cracks in the sand as if the earth itself remembered how to live again. At the old Carter house, life returned slowly, beautifully. Rachel tended to her small garden every morning, her straw hat tilted low, hands steady despite the tremor that sometimes caught her when she was tired. Ghost followed her everywhere, never more than a few feet away, moving with a quiet pride. He still carried the faint scar on his leg, but it didn't slow him down. When she bent to water the plants, he'd nudge her elbow, and when she sat on the porch swing at sunset, he'd rest his head in her lap and sigh, that deep, contented sound that only comes from peace earned the hard way. The clinic had sent her final paperwork, her recovery complete, bills erased through aid and donations. Her health was still fragile, but stable, and her heart stronger than it had been in years. On the porch railing, a small wooden plaque hung, handcrafted by Wyatt. Burned into the wood were the words. Saved by love, guarded by faith. Rachel would trace the letters with her fingers sometimes, tears threatening but never falling. One afternoon, a military Humvee pulled up the dirt road, raising a cloud of golden dust. Clay stepped out, his uniform crisp, his sleeves rolled up against the heat. He carried a sealed envelope under his arm and a faint grin that told her the news was good. Mail delivery, he said, holding it out. Rachel took it carefully, tearing the flap open. Inside was a letter embossed with the Department of Defense seal. She read it once, then again, slower. Her hand went to her mouth. They're recognizing Ghost, she whispered. He's being honored, official commendation for bravery and service. Clay nodded. We sent the footage from the clinic and the reports from the sheriff. They didn't even hesitate. Rachel laughed, half choked by tears. He's going to be a decorated soldier now. More than that, Clay said softly. He's part of our family, officially. The Corps is naming him an honorary Marine K-9. Ghost tilted his head, ears twitching at his name. Rachel knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. You hear that? You're one of them now. Ghost wagged his tail once, slow and proud. Clay watched quietly, then looked out across the horizon, the endless stretch of land that had once been filled with loss and now carried nothing but light. "Funny thing about war," he said finally. "Sometimes the bravest soldiers don't wear uniforms. They just have hearts too big to quit." That evening, they gathered again, the same circle that had stood by Rachel when everything was falling apart. The Marines, Helen, Maria, even Deputy Langdon came by. The table outside was lined with food, cornbread, roasted vegetables, ribs still sizzling from the grill. The air buzzed with laughter and the low hum of country music from a dusty old speaker. When the sun dipped below the horizon, Helen stood with a small glass in her hand. "To Ghost," she said simply. "The kind of soldier we all wish we were." Everyone raised their cups. Rachel smiled, eyes shining in the firelight. "To the ones who find us when we're lost," she added. "And to the ones who stay." Ghost barked once, loud, proud, perfect. Laughter rippled through the group. Later, when the fire burned low and the others drifted away, Rachel sat alone on the porch, Ghost's head resting in her lap once more. The night stretched wide, stars scattered like diamonds over the desert. Somewhere far off, coyotes called to one another, their voices soft and distant. "You know," she whispered, stroking his fur, "I used to pray for a miracle. I thought it would come like thunder or lightning, but it came on 4 legs, covered in dust and scars." Ghost closed his eyes, his breathing slow and steady. Rachel looked toward the horizon where the first light of dawn was beginning to rise, pale gold against an ocean of blue. "Thank you," she murmured. "For finding me when no one else did." And in that stillness, she could almost hear Daniel's voice, faint but warm, carried on the desert wind. "You're not alone anymore." She smiled through the tears. "No," she whispered. "I'm not." Ghost stirred beside her, lifting his head slightly, his gaze following hers toward the horizon. The wind carried the faintest scent of rain and sagebrush. The earth was quiet, the sky alive. And for the first time in years, everything felt right. Because home wasn't a place. It was a promise. A bond that couldn't be broken, not by time, not by loss, not even by death. And at the heart of it all stood a shepherd, scarred, steadfast, and unafraid. A reminder that miracles don't always arrive with wings. Sometimes, they walk beside us, loyal, silent, and unshakably brave.